So a warm welcome back to all of you for this, our first assembly of the year. It has certainly been an interesting last 12 months for us all, but before I start, I do want to just remind you about the importance of the protocols that we have in place at school. They're here to keep you safe, and it's important that we all follow them. Remember, wear a mask, socially distance, and sanitize. It's really important that we remember to do these things for each other. But it's also important to remember that we've all gone through quite a lot over the last 12 months. It's been difficult, and it may well be difficult for us in the future. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. What's the future going to look like, and how are we going to respond as Georgians together?
It starts when this NASA probe, Voyager 1, was launched into space. Its mission: to explore, to take photos, to gather information about the solar system and its planets, sending them all back to NASA for analysis. Travelling at over 35,000 miles an hour, it took a full 2 years, not until 1979, that Voyager had reached Jupiter and sent back never-before-seen images of the largest planet in our solar system. And then another year went by before it reached Saturn in 1980. As you might have realised, the solar system is a big place. And if you're in doubt about that, it wasn't until 1990, a full 13 years after its launch, that it reached the furthest planet of all, Pluto. And it was from there that it took a photo of a tiny planet far off in the distance. That photo soon became one of its most famous and important photos. You may not recognize the planet. It's incredibly small after all, but you know it very well because it's here. It's Earth. That tiny dot is our home, taken from the far reaches of our solar system. Everyone you know, everything you've done, everything you've seen or heard of has happened on that tiny little dot. Everything you've gone through over the last 12 months has happened on that tiny little dot.
But this is where it gets interesting. Voyager continued its exploration of space for the next 24 years. And in 2014, 37 years after its launch, it did something that no other human-made object has ever done before. It crossed what's called the termination shock. It left our solar system. Voyager 1 is no longer exploring our solar system. It is now exploring the galaxy. It is our ambassador for everything that is out there in deep space. And just in case Voyager does encounter extraterrestrial life, it contains a small gold disc.
On that gold disc is a star map that shows the location of our solar system and the position of Earth. It also includes diagrams of an atom to show what type of life form we are, and music, including panpipes from Peru, drums from Africa, and music from such great masters as Mozart and Beethoven. But there's also a piece of music called "Dark Was the Night and Cold Was the Ground" by 1920s bluesman Blind Willie Johnson. Blind Willie Johnson was born to a poor farming family in Texas in 1897. He wasn't born blind. At the age of 7, his stepmother blinded him by splashing acid in his eyes during a drunken argument with his father. Due to his blindness, he found it hard to find regular work. But despite being blind, he learned to play the guitar. As soon as he was good enough, he tried to earn some money performing, often to only a handful of people on the street, earning what he could when he could. Eventually, he managed to save enough money to make a record. It was a huge gamble, and he invested all the money he had. It sold no more than a couple of hundred copies, and was barely heard of again. Blind Willie Johnson was left with almost nothing. And then, during the Great Depression of the 1930s, he lost what little money remained. He was left with absolutely nothing. Despite all of these hardships, he continued playing his beloved guitar, sometimes in bars, sometimes on the street corner, earning just enough to get by from day to day. Then, on top of everything else, in 1945, the house where he was living burnt down in a fire. Penniless, he had nowhere else to go, so he continued to sleep in the ruins of his burned down house, using wet rags and newspapers as a bed. Not surprisingly, he soon contracted pneumonia. But due to the racial inequality in the US at the time, he was refused access to the medical attention that he needed, simply because he was black. He died on the 18th of September, 1945, penniless and alone in the burned ruins of his home, a poor, forgotten, broken man, insignificant and unimportant.
Except his music's just left the solar system. Now, as I mentioned before, we are all faced with difficulties right now, having to wear masks, having to socially distance, sanitizing all the time, and not always being able to see our friends and do what you want at weekends. It's easy under those circumstances to give up, to throw our hands up in the air and say, I don't want to do it anymore. I'm sure blind Willie Johnson thought the same, except he chose not to, and his music's just left the solar system. We might be tempted to use COVID as an excuse. It's not our fault our lives have made so much harder recently. Perhaps that's an excuse to expect less of ourselves, for doing less, for achieving less. But it wasn't blind Willie Johnson's fault that he was blinded as a child. And yet, he still learned to play the guitar. He didn't give in. And his music is now exploring the galaxy. It wasn't his fault that his house burned down, or that he was unable to get medical care just because of the colour of his skin. But those things didn't stop him either. And his music is now representing the whole of humanity. His music will be our first introduction to another civilization or life form, if it's out there. If Willie Johnson's story teaches us anything, it's that we never know what the future has in store for us. If we give in to hardships and difficulties, we risk losing all those fantastic opportunities that lie ahead of us. Think of all the times that Willie Johnson could have given up, and who would have blamed him? But also think about what he would have lost if he had. All of you are talented. All of you are amazing. You have the ability and the opportunity to make a difference and to change the world around you for the better. But none of those things happen automatically. And they certainly don't happen if we give up when things get tough. So I want you all to remember that whatever the year ahead throws at us, we are Georgians. We take on difficulties. We know that by taking on those difficulties, that's the way we improve. That's the way we get better. We embrace the challenge. We leave easy for other schools. So I want you all to have an amazing year. I want you all to get the support that's available around you every single day. But most of all, I want you to enjoy it and look to the future. Look to those opportunities that lie ahead of you. Grasp them whenever you can and make the most of every single day here at St. George's. Have a great year. Best wishes and thank you.
clases me sentí nerviosa, ya que no sabía si me iba a alcanzar el tiempo a terminar mis tareas, pero al mismo tiempo me sentí feliz porque me podía reencontrar de nuevo con mis amigos, pero no de la misma manera. Me siento feliz, nerviosa, muchas emociones después de estar un año en casa y encontrarme con mis amigos otra vez. Me sentí súper feliz porque, con mi mejor amiga hablábamos, pero yo quería verla en persona. Y feliz, hablamos un poco y nos contamos cómo pasó todo esto de la cuarentena.
El reencuentro también fue súper emocionante y fue súper lindo porque era gente con la que uno comparte mucho y adora generalmente, y los lazos son súper importantes y poder recomponerlos y reencontrarlos es hermoso. Lo que más extrañaba del colegio era compartir los espacios, tocar las cosas, poder caminar y sentir los olores y saber que todo esto proviene de algo que me enseñó un millón de cosas a lo largo de estos 6 años en el secundario y los otros 6 años en el prep, así que es como de alguna manera volver a casa.